Matthew, everyday audiophile, music lover, and today, coffee enthusiast. It's a bit too early to be having a beer, and so every morning I do like my coffee. Oh, it's nice. I'm not sure about you. I do a pour over in the morning. To me, it's the best way to enjoy coffee if you have the time, but regular drip coffee is fine if you're using good beans. My brother would tell you that you have to have a burr grinder, and I would say that's correct to get the most even grind on your beans. But that is another topic. Let's talk about music. Just a little refill. So, living in Fort Worth, it's not often that I get the time to go visit some of our members of the group that are in Dallas. But when I'm in office for the week, which is in North Dallas, I do get the chance to go to a couple of their systems. And this past week, I had the pleasure of listening to a system that breaks the mold from what our traditional systems are that we think of. So on the front end, he primarily uses vinyl and CD. There is some streaming in there, but he's working on that side to improve its quality. So he has an Aeon CD transport, don't remember the exact model, feeding into a merging audio DAC and power supply and master clock combo, so that's 3 separate boxes. That then feeds into an Octave Ep.5 SC preamp, and then that goes into an Accuphase A80 stereo amp. Finally, for the speakers, he has German Physik Unicorn Mark II. If you look at these speakers, they have zero wife appeal. It's just the way that it is. But don't let the looks fool you, because they are some wonderful, wonderful sounding speakers with some attributes that I think a lot of people would enjoy in a speaker. And you can probably tell by looking at it that it is an omnidirectional speaker. So it radiates sound in all directions for the most part, and it gives you a better sense of space, of three-dimensional space, soundstaging, so to speak. Additionally, it is a single driver, which means there is no crossover between your amplifier and the driver itself, which has a ton of benefits. Some of my favorite systems were single driver wideband, especially for jazz or small orchestral pieces. They did extraordinarily well. They couldn't handle rock or large orchestral pieces that well, but at the time I never listened to that type. So yeah, for jazz, they're perfect. The speed and transparency is another level compared to even the speakers that I'm using right now. But let's describe this system in a single sentence. A sublime three-dimensional presentation with wonderful texture, though not quite as much bass output as I would like. That's really the way that I'm going to describe this through and through. And I mean that in the best way possible. The bass is there, it just doesn't have the punch due to it being a single driver. And let's touch on that real quick. Even though it's a single driver, the way that it's designed makes it act like a three-way system. It is pistonic, going up and down to a certain point, then it moves to a bending wave on the thin carbon fiber membrane of that driver, so it itself vibrates. And then beyond that, it kind of acts like a balance mode radiator, where the surface modulates to achieve the high frequencies. And this is all done naturally through the design of the driver. There is no crossover that makes this work, and I think that's pretty genius. It allows you to still claim it's a single driver while getting that 2 to 2.5 way performance out of it. Now, you certainly do pay for it. These speakers are not cheap, but it does show in its performance. It really is next level. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that soundstaging for me is far more important than other aspects of a system. I can forgive a system that is just ever so slightly bright, or a system that doesn't have enough bass punch, or maybe the system's just a little bit too lush or forward in the mid-range. All of those things to me are less important than a system that gives me that three-dimensional space of the music that I'm listening to. And this system is by far one of the best that I've heard. It even beats the Boulder system that I recently talked about in that sense of scale of space. And that's saying a lot because the Rockport speakers in and of themselves they're a wonderful speaker. But while they do a lot of things really well, they can't compete with the German Physik when it comes to that sense of space. And that just has to do with the design of the driver and the fact that it is an omnidirectional speaker. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that sense of space. What did that feel like? So I was there for about 2.5 hours. We played about 24 tracks or so, a mix of physical media and vinyl, although we did throw a couple stream tracks in there. And the thing that stood out to me is these speakers, when you think of a sensitive speaker, a speaker that can show the flaws in a recording, this one does that, but it does it in a different way than any other speaker I've heard, and that is in the presentation of that soundstage. When we threw poorly recorded tracks at it, this is both on CD, vinyl, and streamed media, so all three, the soundstage didn't just collapse, but it kind of formed a W shape in my mind. So the bottom points of that W were where the speakers were, and then it just kind of radiated backwards in a V from both speakers. So the singer may have been 10 feet behind the speaker, and then you got some weird instruments coming up to the speaker, and then they went out again. When you got to a recording that was more naturally recorded, so you could say just a microphone in the space recording what's around it, and it was mastered well, then that's where these speakers, they threw an image that went in front, behind, to the ground, to a proper height, and it was truly magical to listen to because you could have sounds that were grounded on the floor. The singer is right there at the right height. And the speakers truly disappeared. That is their party trick. And they do it so well that it makes you forget about anything else. We listened to a lot of jazz. And in the beginning of the video, you heard me say these lack bass output. And that simply isn't true when it comes to the right kinds of music. You don't miss it. It's there. It has texture. It just doesn't go super deep, right? So for jazz and for obviously acoustic or light, small chamber orchestra pieces, the bass was never an issue. I never once thought, man, I wish I had a subwoofer. I wish there was more bass output. It was only when we threw, say, electronic music at it or rock or music that had and needed that bass output that you could sense the speaker was trying and it just couldn't output enough. And so if that isn't your type of music anyways, then the speakers are perfect from top to bottom. And I will say, I think a lot of that magic also comes from the Accuphase. It's taken me a while to get to this point, but I do believe the Accuphase makes some of the best amplifiers out there. And this one shows. It is 60 watts into 8 ohms, doubling that every step of the way into 4 ohms, 2 ohms, even stable into 1 ohm. And it's a beast. It looks great. And I can tell you very easily that at best, all of the previous amplifiers that he's had, so that includes a Vitus stereo amp. I don't remember the exact model. Audio Research, he had reference monoblocks. It also sounded better than those. The Accuphase is just so much more natural to listen to, and I think it pairs really well with the German Physik speakers. So going back to the soundstaging, it was really interesting hearing a speaker that presented the flaws of music in a different way than any other system that I'd ever heard. Sure, when you got to a bad recording, not only did the soundstage collapse, but you also heard the actual flaws in the music itself, like any normal system, but it didn't draw attention to those. It did a decent job of hiding those flaws and making the music listenable but the soundstage just was awful. And let's take my system, for example. It does a great job of showing you the flaws, but the soundstage is still there. I can hear left to right. It may be a little bit flat, but the soundstage is still there. So in some way, it really makes you seek those really great recordings. It makes it even more important because the difference between a decent soundstage, great soundstage, and terrible soundstage is really easy to hear with these speakers. And so if you happen to go to an audio show and these are on display, I do encourage you to listen to them and give them a couple tracks because the difference is astounding from worst to best. I've talked about soundstaging a lot. Let's talk about some other aspects of the speaker really quick, and then we'll wrap it up with a conclusion. The frequency response, I've already mentioned that the lows were really not there, and that really just comes down to it's a single driver. No single driver system is going to have great output. It doesn't matter what kind of loaded horn system that you pair it with. That's just the case. Now, these speakers do go pretty low for being a single driver, but they still suffer from the same problem. So that's all I'm really going to say there. The mid-range all the way up to the highs were nice and neutral. The speaker isn't warm by any means. It isn't cool. It isn't bright. It is a nice amount of airy, so I do think there's a slight rise in the treble response, but it's not enough to say it's fatiguing. I also mentioned texture. These speakers are incredibly honest, and you can hear the texture on any of the instruments or the voices. One of the systems I often visit around where I live, he has big JBL K2s, and they are known for presenting music as it was recorded. You can hear the texture really, really well. And these German Physik speakers, they don't quite reach that level because they're not horn loaded, but they do get really close, and I think that's impressive for a single driver. Additionally, they have just a little bit more sweetness in the air. And I think that is part of the omnidirectional design of the speaker. So really, all in all, it is a well-balanced speaker from top to bottom. There's no lack of bass if you're playing the correct music. That's a big if right there. And the soundstaging makes you question why you would buy any other speaker. And I truly, truly mean that. They're not something that I could have in my room. They do need a very big room for you to set up and play them. But if I had the space and my wife approved of how they look, which I already know that she won't, I would definitely consider them. Before going, Adnan, thank you again for having me over and letting me listen to your wonderful system. It's been so interesting seeing where it started, where I first heard it with the Magnepans, and where you've ended up now. I think it is the right choice, and I can't wait to see where you take the system next to improve it. But until then, I will see y'all next time. Cheers.